Hey everyone, and welcome back to JavaScript in Metaphors. Today's topic is going to be about understanding data, and I believe that's a key topic to get in early on because it's going to enhance your learning so much when you're able to see the connection between data and what's actually going on in the programming language. Because sometimes your learning is taken a little bit out of context. If you're looking at how to use a string or how to use an array, how are these methods going to help you? What is the data structure actually doing in a real application? Well, here we're going to take a look at how we're using it in a real application and try to get an overview over how the data and the programming language interacts together in order to create something tangible in the form of the application on the screen. So that's going to be really exciting. It's going to be really key to grasp this early on and have it in the back of your mind as we're going through the course. And it's going to serve you well in the upcoming lessons. All right, let's dive in. So, last time we left it here, where we kind of built out this um, application or chat application from scratch. It's not fully functioning yet, but it's got enough so we can start kind of discussing some of the nuances of the JavaScript language. And, I wanted to use this as a starting point and talk to you a little bit about data. So, I'm just going to switch back here to the editor and open up the data.js. So, why do I want to talk about data? Well, a couple of reasons actually. So, when I first started to learn how to program, um, I somehow couldn't make the connection between learning a lot of the programming concepts with how to kind of get things out of the screen and creating, the visual content. So the connection first clicked for me when I started thinking about applications in terms of data and thinking of the programming language as a way of controlling the data and manipulating it and creating it, um, taking one data set and making it into something else. Because that's basically the gist of the programming language. It allows you to take the data and transform it into something else. And making that connection is when it started to click for me a little bit. So I want to just take a look at the data here and see how we've used it to kind of get to um, an application in our case. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about data and what it is. And it's kind of important to try to figure out how to connect the dots with basic programming concepts that we'll get into later, like arrays, objects, strings, and numbers. How is it all connected to what is displaying on a website? Well, you can think about it like this. Whenever you go to a website, the whole thing is completely made up of data. And data can be everything from text to a number to an image, um, the number of favorites on a tweet, the number of retweets. That's all data. Any images you see, that's data too. And it's kind of what drives. It's kind of what drives the internet today. So making the connection between what you see on the screen and the fact that it's all data driven is quite important. And it can come from anywhere. So data could be something that you create in your application, like we've done here. We've kind of created our own data set, um, and we're just loading it up into the memory of our program. But this could just as likely be coming from an API. So we'd send an HTTP request somewhere, maybe our server, our backend server, and it could return this data set here as a JSON response. That would be just as likely. So kind of this is the starting point for us. We're understanding this and realizing that the magic of a programming language is that it gives us the ability to manipulate the data. So we can change text and we can change numbers. We can manipulate anything really and create what we need when we need it. And that's important because we're not always given what is needed in our application. So imagine that this data was coming from an API. Maybe it wasn't our API, but someone else created an API, and we called it and we received a data set just like this. The creator of that API can't know ahead of time what I'm going to need in my application. Now I have the name here, but what if I needed to have a last name as well? Well, they can't really add that on after we got the data, and we can't really add it on either. But if we had another API, we could use this API to kind of look up the same user and get a data set with all of the last names, and then we could use a programming language to kind of put those two pieces together. So you can think of it like kind of like data being different sizes of t-shirts. So imagine a t-shirt company made a one-size-fits-all and tried to sell it to everyone around the world. Well, it wouldn't work because people have different needs, and so do applications. Applications have different data needs, and we need to kind of take that into account when we're working with it, that we're not always going to get the data that we need. And the beauty is we can use the programming language to kind of massage it into or manipulate it into something that we can work with. Now, if we take a look at what we have in front of us here, this is the data set that we created for the chat app. And we have messages which have an ID, and the ID is kind of here corresponding to a user ID. So you kind of have a hook to kind of tie these things together. And how we're doing it doesn't really matter right now. We're going to get to that later. But you can see that the data has different properties. So we have strings, which we'll also go in depth in later, and numbers. And we're using this data to create this sidebar here, where we have all of the people and we're listing out kind of the messages or the last message that they received. And then inside this main window here, we have the opportunity to kind of list out all of the messages that we have in the conversation with that user. So you can see that if we go to our index.js file, let's go ahead and go to the sidebar. So the sidebar is actually importing the contacts and the messages, which is the data set. So these two data sets that we just talked about, the contacts here and the messages here. The sidebar is importing that. So we have that available inside of the context of this code. Now, right here, doesn't really matter right now. We're going to get to it later, but we're running a loop on each contact. So basically what we're doing here is we're going through each contact one by one, and we are doing something with it. So just don't think about what's or how this is happening right now. We'll get to that later, but think about the fact that we are going through each contact. So each one of these data sets right here. This is one entity, this is one entity, this is one entity, and so on and so forth. We're going through each one and we are creating a contact card. So we're taking the data that's coming in and we're using JavaScript to create a different data structure that is used to render out this sidebar here, or these cards in the sidebar. So you can see how the data kind of translates into what's on the screen. And that is the most important thing to understand in this video, how the data is related to what's on the screen. So if you get that and you think that you understand it, then that's a big step forward in trying to understand how to program. Because it's really, really interconnected. And it's going to make all the difference if you can start thinking about applications and web applications in terms of data, and think about an application. When you see an application on the screen, try to think about, well, what kind of data does this piece need? How does my data structure need to look like? And I know it's too early for that right now, but once we kind of get through the data structures um, and figure out how everything kind of is connected, then go around and look at websites and see if you can kind of create a data structure for a website. We'll create an exercise on this later. I think it's a great idea to do something like this to kind of understand this point. For now, I think we'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for tuning in.